who suggests in Dhanyaloka that a good book ought to confine itself to one of the four goals of life. I reasoned that I had written a book on Artha, material well being. This was India Unbound, and another one on Dharma, moral well being, the difficulty of being good. It was time to tackle the third goal, kama, desire and pleasure, something that has troubled me throughout my life. It thus completes a trilogy based on the ancient Trivarga. A fourth goal, moksha, spiritual well being, was added later in history, but it also appears to be clearly beyond my reach. In the book on Dharma, I asked how should one live, and I answered with our four day to day moral dilemmas. Here I examine how do we cope with desire in order to live a rich, flourishing life. India is a nation in transition from tradition to modernity, and it is just as important to converse openly about desire and the emotional life as about economic prosperity and democracy. For too long, we have repressed emotions and lived with patriarchal stereotypes. This is not healthy for a society. This book is a product of a lifetime of observing people, and I decided early on that the only way to capture the rich ideas surrounding desire is through the personal lives of individuals. It is by empathizing with the suffering of the protagonists of this book, Amar, learning from his mistakes as he comes of age, that we realize that there is another way to live. Hence, the book needed a story to connect the ideas, so I have attempted what seems impossible to write a biography of a sense intoxicating emotion. Only a work of the imagination can do this, presenting a mirror to the reader so as to reveal his or her own life. I have thus employed the genre of fiction as a vehicle. In any case, the line between fiction and non fiction is tennis, the only difference being that fiction has to make sense. I did not want to clutter the story with numbered footnotes and diatrical marks, yet I did what want to help the reader who wished to read more about the ideas sprinkled throughout the text. Hence, I have identified the relevant sentence or phrases in bold by page number in the notes at the end of the book. I have also tried to be reader friendly and dispensed with theatrical marks in rendering Sanskrit words into English. Let me admit, in conclusion, a key limitation of this book. It is written from a male perspective. As a man, my perception of female desire is naturally limited, and I ask the reader to bear with this inadequacy and, in fact, welcome comments from both men and women on a complex subject that we do not discuss enough. Prologue. The beguiling realm of karma. Desire is the essence of life. Mahabharata, Parv 12. Our existence is but a brief crack of light between two eternities of darkness, wrote Vladimir Nabokov in the opening lines of his memoir, Speak Memory. Whereas the fearful unknown of the dark voids drove my father to mystical religion, I was drawn to the bright crevice, curious to discover the extraordinary visions that might lie therein. There I found kama, which means desire in Sanskrit. Unlike animals, human beings are not governed by instinct alone. Instinctual desire travels from our senses to our imagination. Whence it creates a fantasy around a specific individual. These fantasies are the source of intense pleasure, which happens to be the other meaning of kama. Despite constraints, men and women found a way to communicate their fantasies, and this gave rise to erotic love. Most societies worried about this charming human inclination by instituting monogamy via the institution of marriage for the sake of social harmony. This is a memoir of karma, and I sometimes wish I had written it when I was younger, when desire was more troublesome. Young, vigorous warriors are supposed to be better candidates for sex, not aging ciphers who are resigned to mostly look back. It is unbefitting and perverse for men who are aged to have erotic passions, nor it is meet for ample hipped women. Those bosoms are flaccid to cling to life or love. Kama is not only the joy of sensual attraction, but also the aesthetic delight one feels while, say, beholding a Mughal miniature of great beauty. Kama can be a desire for anything, but it refers generally to erotic desire. Kama is also the desire to act. It drove Shakespeare to sit down one morning and write the dazzling Othello, whose eponymous hero turned out, alas, to be one of the unhappiest victims of Kama. Since my ancient Hindu ancestors realized that Kama is the source of action, of creation and procreation, they elevated it not only to the status of a god, but also saw it as one of the goals of human life. They thought of it as a cosmic force that animates all of life. There is another rich word in Sanskrit, smara, which means memory or love, depending on the context, especially a remembrance of sexual love. In writing this memoir, I have learned that the recollection of love is sometimes more powerful than the original confused experience itself. Memory binds us to our former slaves, sieves together events that have not met before, reshuffling the past to suit our present. Marcel Proust, the French novelist, believed that only a recollection does an experience become fully significant. As our imagination arranges it in a meaningful pattern, recreating it to suit our desires. Remembrance takes us back to the well springs of being, to the cultivation of a private consciousness, as well as to the mystery of eros. Although the two dark eternities before and after our brief lives are identical, Nabokov believed that human beings are more afraid of the abyss after death and viewed the one before birth more calmly. While I was in my mother's womb, I remember overhearing my parents, much like Abhimanyu. They were recently married and they were talking about Kama. Visiting them was my mother's charming, fun loving cousin, Ramu, who is best described as a Kama optimist. He told them stories about Kama's ability to give aesthetic pleasure and regaled them with strategies from the Kama Sutra for entering the web of desire, as William Blake called it. Unfortunately, my mother dozed off just as my unworldly father, who was a Kama pessimist, began to warn her about Kama's darker, sinister side. how it creates but also destroys. It inspires love, un- but is uncontrollable, obsessive and violent. Our neighbor's wife is an intoxicating temptation. Giving in to it brings pain and tragedy, destroying families and peace. Because my mother fell asleep, I had learnt how to enter karma's web, but not how to exit it. And it has taken a lifetime to discover how to enjoy desire, but not too much. How to strike a civilized balance between overindulgence and repression. The beguiling world of karma is full of paradoxes. I desire only what I don't have. Once I attain it, karma dies. Plato wisely observed that desire is a lack of something that one does not possess. Lovers long to unite in order to fill this deficiency, but how can something that is missing or perishes once attained be a goal of life? Yet karma is ubiquitous and indest- indestructible. Kama Gita, a song of desire embedded deep inside the Mahabharata, reminds us that when we control one desire, another pops up. If I give up desire for wealth and give away my money, a new craving emerges, a desire for reputation. If I renounce the world and become an ascetic, I am driven by a desire for heaven or for moksha, liberation from the human condition. King Yayati realized that he had grown old, but his thirst was forever young. In the very moment of enjoying Kama, Yayati thought that even in 1,000 years these pleasures would remain unsatisfied, and this prospect filled him with melancholy. More than 2,500 years ago, in the forests of North India, some curious fellows, while conducting mental experiment called the Upanishads, were struck by the unsatisfactory nature of karma. To find an answer to the riddle of karma was also central to Buddha's project. The ancient yogis sought ways to quiet this endless futile striving. Hence, the goal was chitta vritti nirodha, to still the fluctuations in the mind, says Patanjali. The answer of the Bhagavad Gita, the great post Vedic text of Hinduism from the 2nd century BCE, to this riddle is to learn to act without desire. But how is this possible when man is desire, according to the earliest Upanishad? You are what you are what your deep driving desire is. As your desire is, so is your will. As your will is, so is your deed. As your deed is, so is your destiny. The Gita is aware that a person cannot stop desiring, nor does it want him to lose the will to act. What it means by desireless action is to renounce the personal rewards of your actions. Act so that you don't care who gets the credit. I have read this refrain dozens of times, but I remain skeptical that a person can give up his fundamental egoistic desire and still remain human. We tend to blame the Victorians for the prudishness of the Indian middle class, but lurking deep in the Indian psyche is deep pessimism about karma's prospects. It led the great ascetic god Shiva to burn the god of love and frustration when the latter disturbed his 1,000 year meditation. Hence, desire exists, ananga, bodiless, in the human mind. And this surfeit of karma pessimism, I was drawn oddly enough to the karma optimism. It may have been because of my incomplete prenatal education, or perhaps the accident of encountering a happy ganja smoking Pandit discovered by my grandmother to counteract my Christian missionary school education, where I was taught to equate desire with original sin. The Pandit told stories of playful, mischievous gods who created the world for the fun of it, and one of them, Krishna, danced the Ras Leela with 40,000 women for an entire Brahma night that lasted 4.5 billion human years. From him, I learned that our civilization was the only one that elevated karma to an aim of life and left behind a legacy of erotic Sanskrit love poetry, the Kama Sutra, and erotic sculptures at Khajuraho. Even the devotional love of God took a romantic turn in the Geet Govind, where Radha, a married woman, longs to unite with her divine adulterous lover. I'm, an, I'm at an age when I mostly relive memories, some intimate, others wistful, and still others so distressing that I am left sweating. I'm not a grizzled roe. However, looking back on the adventures of my prime, nor a satiated libertine who regrets the dying of the old fire, much like a next person I desire to desire. During my memoir, I tend to stop my narrative, and while I wait to recover, I offer the reader observations on what I have learnt about karma from my life, my friends, and literature. Fiction is a better teacher than reality because we have never lived enough. Literature extends our horizons beyond our confined parochial experience, and it is more objective. We do not envy a character as we do in real life. The underlying premise of this memoir is that we live for a while and then we die. It matters to us in ways that it does not to other creatures. What is the mattering? What is this mattering? We want our lives to have meaning. Well, karma too is a gesture in the direction of a meaningful life. We are constantly reminded about dharma, our duty to others. The thought escapes us that karma is also a duty to ourselves. The memoir is a reminder that karma is needed to realize our capacity of living a flourishing life. Socrates pointed out that we are unique among creatures in being able to address the question, how shall I live? This question was so important that he claimed that the unexamined life is not worth living. Ironically, the citizens of Athens put him to death for forcing them to think about the meaning of their lives. This memoir attempts the same project with the hope that Socrates' tragic fate will not befall me.